Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's ARPAS-UK webinar on drone logistics, transporting dangerous goods by drone. We're delighted to have Geoff Leach from Viking Drone Packaging and Anthony Venetz here too. Geoff has over 30 years of experience in the dangerous goods, transporting dangerous goods, and Anthony has plenty of experience with the uncrewed aircraft side, meaning that together they make a formidable team. I'm going to hand over to them directly because I'm here purely to help introduce, and we will make a start. Please do ask questions. We will answer them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yes, so just to set the context a little bit, so Viking Drone Packaging is a business that Geoff and I and another co-founder established a couple of years ago now, dedicated to the packaging side of things for transporting, for logistics with drones. And yeah, Geoff was the former head of the Dangerous Goods Office at the Civil Aviation Authority for how many years, Geoff?
Too many, actually. I was at the CAA for 32 years and yeah, in Dangerous Goods since 1990.
So let's make a start. And Geoff, I'll hand over to you, and Geoff and I are going to tag team a little bit through the presentation today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anthony. And yes, and good afternoon, everybody. And whilst I was at the CAA, I was also chairman of the international panel that develops the regulations for the transport of dangerous goods.
Apologies for that at the moment. I'm not quite sure what has happened. It appears that both Geoff and Anthony have dropped out. I'm just going to pause the recording for a moment and we'll see what we can again then. Apologies for that, and we shall continue.
Okay, so as I said, we're using the term dangerous goods, and perhaps we won't be familiar with what that term means. And it can encompass not only the obvious things like the bomb and the radioactive material and things like that, but everyday household items like nail polish or aerosols or bleach, fireworks, many things. In fact, the definition of dangerous goods talks about articles, things like lithium batteries, for example, or substances capable of posing a hazard to health, safety, property, or the environment. And you'll see on the left-hand side there, we've got a blood vial, which is most relevant to us this afternoon, because that really, we're going to look at what types of blood sample and other types of sample would fall under the definition of dangerous goods, because they are the only ones really that have been transported by drones so far. Obviously, looking forward, there's potential for others, but where we are at the moment is really around the sort of the medical supplies and medical samples. So, Anthony, if you could just advance the slide, please. Okay, so where do we find the requirements? Well, the requirements are contained in a publication produced by ICAO. Now, ICAO stands for the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they produced a publication called the Technical Instructions, and these contain the legal requirements for the transport of dangerous goods. And we'll find these referred to in legislation all across the world, almost without exception. Wherever you go, there will be a reference to the ICAO Technical Instructions. And these detail around about 3,500 different items of dangerous goods. Some are kind of generic headings for some dangerous goods which can't be individually listed, but it details all of the things that are required in terms of identification and packing and marking and labeling and documentation. But as I touched upon earlier, the technical instructions, which was first produced in the 1980s, has really been written around the carriage of dangerous goods on conventional transport aircraft. No thought was given to drones. And so the transport of dangerous goods by drone is really in its infancy. Next slide, please, Anson. Okay, dangerous goods then. We've got 9 classes of dangerous goods. And this isn't a league table, if you like. Explosives aren't necessarily more dangerous than corrosives or oxidizers and that kind of thing. But there are 9 separate hazard classes, some of which are subdivided into divisions. The one that we're going to be concerned about today is class 6, and in fact only half of class 6, because that includes toxic material, which we're not looking at, and infectious substances. So we're really going to be homing in on the medical samples, the infectious substances. Okay, we've got, as I said, class 6 is divided into 2. 6.1 is toxic substances, 6.2 infectious substances, and there are varying levels of, or varying degrees, if you like, of hazard posed by infectious substance. Not all infectious substances are currently allowed to be transported by drone, and we'll be looking a little bit more closely at that in just a second. And you'll see here that we're going to be looking at sort of category A and category B. Category A are for the things which are really, we'll look at the definition in just a moment. These are infectious substances which are particularly nasty, if you like, but have life-threatening consequences. And you'll see that it's divided into infectious substances which affect humans, but there are also some infectious substances which only affect animals. Okay, so this is the sort of the higher grade of infectious substance. Below that, we have something called category B, biological substance, which, and you'll see there a UN number. UN stands for United Nations. It's the United Nations who assigns these numbers. And the United Nations, UN 3373, this is the type of dangerous goods which we have been involved in transporting by drone, particularly during COVID, when there was a need to move these low hazard samples by drone, which are far quicker by drone than by conventional means. So a category A would include things like, you may have seen occasionally on the news, an outbreak of Ebola in Africa, some very, very nasty illnesses, things which are, as you see the definition there, capable of causing permanent disability or life-threatening or fatal disease. And there is an indicative list in the regulations about what this includes, which is it's only indicative, but yeah, we haven't reproduced it here. But there are a number of infectious substances, and indeed some things which are perhaps would be a lower category, but are being sent by what we call in a cultured form, so in a concentrated form, and therefore pose a greater danger. So that's category A. Category B is for everything else. And this includes things like COVID, HIV, hepatitis A, maybe to the layman don't sound low hazard infectious substances, but they've been decreed by in fact, the World Health Organization as falling under category B. And it's UN, this type of dangerous goods, UN 3373, which we have been involved in the transport by drone. Here's the 9 classes, and you'll see where class 6 falls, say split into 6.1 toxic, 6.2 infectious, and then you've got category A and category B, and we do have some exceptions. So who is involved in this transport chain? Well, we have a shipper, and the shipper is not a defined term, but it's somebody generally who's causing dangerous goods to go from A to B, and they are responsible for classifying these goods, identifying them. The most important thing of all, the packing of them, so that they don't pose a danger to anybody handling them, marking and labeling and documenting them. Now, in our experience with the drones, of course, the shipper will typically be an NHS trust who are wanting to move their samples from a hospital or a clinic to a laboratory or somewhere else for diagnosis. So they could be, if you like, termed as the shipper. You've then got the operator. In conventional parlance, the operator would be an airline. But you have an operator of the drone, and if they want to carry dangerous goods, they need what's called an approval from the Civil Aviation Authority, and that's granted on the basis of there being adequate information in their operations manual, people being adequately trained, sufficient procedures in place for them to do this safely. Once they've got the approval, any packages have to be inspected prior to loading and after unloading, and check to see that they actually comply with the regulations before they put them on the drone. Now, there's a grey area as far as drones are concerned. In the conventional world, quite often an element will be handled by a handling agent. In the drone world, you could find that the NHS trust member is acting on behalf of the operator. They may be loading the goods onto the drone. They may be closing the drone and sending it off on its way. And so you could, as I say, you could find the person who's actually shipping the goods does perform some of the functions on behalf of the operator. And as in conventional transport, they would be the handling agent, and they are, say, acting on behalf of the operator, the drone operator. I'll pass over now to Anthony, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about the actual drone side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. So this slide is really just to point out that there are sort of three main sort of considerations when it comes to then, transporting these items by UAS. So one thing, as Geoff mentioned, is that the operator needs to have an approval from the CAA as being a dangerous goods carrier, so an approval for that. And that's quite separate from the ARPAS operational authorization that's required as well. So we're all familiar with getting the operational authorization. So, okay, I want to move something from A to B to conduct that flight. I'm dealing with the ARPAS people in the CAA. But if I want to move dangerous goods, I also need an approval from the dangerous goods people in the CAA. So they're two separate things, but both are required. And then the next bit is the packaging itself. So you'll see the acronym I've got up there is CPC. So that stands for Crash Protected Container. And we'll get to that in a moment. But depending on what you're transporting and what category of operation you're conducting, and by that I mean the difference between specific category and certified category operations, there are requirements for use of a crash protected container. And even if you don't need a crash protected container, the packaging still needs to meet the UN specifications. So all of those things have to come together before we can transport something classed as a dangerous good by drone. In terms of the approval to carry dangerous goods, an operator, these are the main components. So we've got our operations manual already for conducting the ARPAS operations, but we need a supplement to that which details how we handle dangerous goods. We need to have the appropriate training in place for the people that are involved. We need to have a safety risk assessment in terms of not just the ARPAS operations or the UAS operations. So we've already got our safety risk assessment for that. But we also need something to cover the potential hazards that are posed by the goods that we're transporting. And in support of that, an appropriate emergency response plan. So, what are the actions that we take if there's a leak from one of the packages, for example? So who do you need to notify? How do you go about cleaning it up? That sort of thing. So they're the main pieces that need to come together for the operator approval. Potentially the trickiest one there is the training side of things. So when it comes to that aspect, it is dependent on, and all of those previous elements as well, are dependent on what sort of dangerous goods we're proposing to transport. And as Geoff mentioned, the ones that have received approval so far in the UK are for the class 3373, so for the sort of low risk end of town. And then the training needs to be approved by the CAA. So it's not just a case of in-house, we're going to develop a training program, we'll train our people and that's the end of the story. It's not quite that simple. So we need an approved training course, and that includes not just the operator's staff, but people acting on behalf of the operator as well, potentially. So the people loading the drone. And it's not just an initial training package, there's a recurrent element in there as well. Geoff, did you want to mention something about the sort of the approved training side of things? Geoff's an approved trainer for dangerous goods.
Yeah, so as far as UN 3373 is concerned, that's not subject to full approval from a shipper's point of view. Any other type of dangerous goods that requires full training has to be provided by a CAA approved trainer. But there's also the additional training approval for the operator, the air operator. So not just in terms of the dangerous goods, but any operator, irrespective of whether or not they carry dangerous goods, have to have their training approved by the CAA. So even if you're an operator not carrying dangerous goods, you've got to have training so that people know what you can't put on the drone. So yeah, there's as I said, as Anthony said, we provide training to shippers and operators.
And that one that Geoff just mentioned, we'll come to in a minute. So that's if you're accepting general goods for transport by drone, as opposed to we know we want to transport specific things like tools or something like that. Then the next part that I touched on earlier was the crash protected containers. So you'll see here is a quote from the CAA cap on carriage of dangerous goods as cargo by drones. And it talks about operators in the specific category. So if you're in the certified category, there's no requirement to use a crash protected container. However, most operations, or pretty much all operations at the moment, are still in the specific category. So we're looking at this requirement. So if there's a high risk to third parties in the event of an accident, a crash protected container must be used. Which then takes us to the question, well, what constitutes a crash protected container? And I guess it's a year and a half ago now or so, the CAA got together with the Vehicle Certification Agency, which is a government body in the UK, to define what testing criteria a container or a package needed to pass in order to be considered as crash protected. So there's a very definite set of criteria there to be able to achieve that sort of designation. The long and the short of it is, it should be able to fall from the operating height and not have the dangerous goods leak from the container after hitting the ground. So the exemptions for the requirement to use a crash protected container are generally dangerous goods carried in accepted quantities, and those in Division 6.2, Category B, so the 3373 ones that we were just talking about. Geoff, did you perhaps want to jump in and explain what accepted quantities means?
Yeah, so accepted quantities is a subset in the technical instructions for very small quantities of dangerous goods. Not all dangerous goods are allowed in accepted quantities, but many are. And these are limited typically to 30 mil in an inner packaging, and the package itself might be limited to 500 mil or a litre. And so they are not subject to full regulation. For example, they don't have to be declared to the operator. There's minimal marking and labelling requirements.
Thanks, Geoff. And so that's where you have some sort of relief from the need to carry or to use a crash protected container. But there's also the case that you might want to use one anyway because the value of the items that you're transporting are so high that you're interested in making sure they, even in the event of a crash, they're not destroyed. You had some examples, Geoff, of specific medicines that were incredibly expensive, weren't they?
Yeah, we've pharmaceuticals, and I'm sure some people in the audience know far better than me, but many pharmaceuticals are very, very high value, and so you wouldn't want to transport them between sites. If there were to be an impact, you could be talking many, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of pounds, as my understanding, that very, very high value pharmaceuticals.
Thanks. And notice there's that caveat there about those in Division 6.2. Now that's something that's been specified in the UK. I haven't seen the same thing specified in Europe. So with EASA, this is perhaps open to interpretation by individual states, but that's not specifically stated anywhere there. So it may be that even for 3373 type dangerous goods, a crash protected container is required. So the general exemption, so sometimes people say, well, the drone's got batteries on it, they're dangerous goods, aren't they? But if they're required for, as part of the equipment for the drone, then there is this general exemption. So required for propulsion purposes like the batteries, or part of the operating requirements. So if you've got a parachute as part of your flight termination system, and it's using a pyro charge, that would be exempt as well from the requirements. The initial use cases seem to be focused on medical logistics, and so we've been sort of honed in on the infectious or potentially infectious substances like blood samples for going to a pathology lab. But there are, of course, lots and lots of other use cases and lots of different classes of dangerous goods, but this seems to be the area that is of most interest at the moment. Potentially some medicines like radiopharmaceuticals, for example, could be interesting items to benefit from transport by drone, which have different packaging requirements, and different crash protected container would be required for those. That last picture is dry ice. Geoff, did you want to just mention what the story is with dry ice? People might...
Dry ice might be used as a refrigerant. Dry ice is solid carbon dioxide, so the gas carbon dioxide in solid form, typically regulated by conventional aircraft because it is an asphyxiant. In the confines of a hold, it can suffocate loaders and others. And so there is currently at the moment, we have to take account of, even though there's obviously nobody on board the drone, dry ice is an item of dangerous goods and needs to be taken account of. And in fact, there are very particular packaging requirements for dry ice, because a packaging containing it has to allow the carbon dioxide to vent as the dry ice sublimates or thaws. If you don't allow it to vent, then you have a risk of the package exploding typically. And of course, when that's containing an infectious substance, that's not what we want.
Thanks. Then we've got this aspect where, well, I want to use my drone for logistics, but I'm not particularly interested in carrying dangerous goods. But if you're open to carrying general cargo, dangerous goods are still relevant, because you need to be able to identify things that you're loading that are potentially misdeclared or undeclared dangerous goods. And again, Geoff, you're probably better positioned to comment on that side of things as well.
So when we regard undeclared, invariably, when we have incidents involving dangerous goods, they're undeclared. They're not declared to the operator, generally through ignorance of the regulations, although just occasionally there is a deliberate act where, you know, if something is marked and labelled as dangerous goods, then it's not going to be carried. And so there have been occasions where shippers have chosen not to mark and label in the hope that they will be accepted for carriage. This is taken very seriously by the authorities. There are requirements for reporting them to the aviation authorities, and as I said, they are undeclared dangerous goods is one of the things that any CAA anywhere in the world will take very seriously as far as the legal investigation is concerned. And
also, there's a training requirement for operators who want to carry these, general cargo, so that their staff have the competency required to identify things prior to loading on that aircraft. Yeah. Okay, that's our quick run through. You've seen two of us. There's Dave Willett in the US with our associate company, Viking Packaging Specialist, a very large company in the US that does packaging for all kinds of things by air. And just to finish off a little bit about what we do, in terms of the consulting, we were able to assist, for example, Skyports with getting the first CAA approval for carrying dangerous goods by drone in the UK. So we advise on what the regulations are and how best to comply with them. As we mentioned, Geoff's an approved trainer for dangerous goods, and we have a number of different courses related to that. And in terms of packaging, we provide all of those things there. So the packaging to comply with the UN specifications. So, okay, I don't need crash protected container, but I still need compliant packaging. We also do bespoke solutions, so customizing it to fit the requirements of a specific model of drone. And we also, I'm proud to say, developed the first crash protected container in the world. So we developed something specifically for carrying vials of infectious substances. Here's one of our bespoke containers. And there's our crash protected container getting dropped from a helicopter. So we did that many times and had the required results. So we didn't have any leaks, and the vehicle certification agency certified that package as a crash protected container. And I think it's still the only one, actually. But that was maybe about 6 months ago now, maybe a bit longer, I guess. So that's our presentation, and happy to take some questions. There's our contact details, so our website and email addresses for Geoff and I if you'd like to get in touch. But Eleanor, can we hand over for any questions, please?
Indeed, and thank you both very much for a very good overview and dive into some of the areas that we need to be thinking about in this. So we do have questions, but in the meantime, we'll start with these while others think about what else they would like to ask. So let's start with, what countermeasures can prevent units from being intercepted with anti-drone rifles?
That's not really something that we're going to comment on, I'd say. So
I would say it's not so relevant to this particular side of things. Are there requirements for carrying batteries not utilized for providing power to propulsion systems, i.e. battery packs transportation?
Very much so. There are very strict regulations in place for the transport of lithium batteries. Lithium-ion, the rechargeable batteries, which are typically used to power drones, lithium metal, which are non-rechargeable. Yes, there are regulations about transporting lithium batteries.
And specific packaging requirements as well, aren't they, Geoff? In terms of
very much so. Yeah, I mean there are. It depends. There are different configurations as well. So if you're shipping a battery on its own, there are different requirements that apply compared to whether the battery is contained in a piece of equipment or packed with a piece of equipment.
Right.
And in fact, we run. It's such an in-depth subject. I mean, we run 2-day training courses on the transport of lithium batteries.
That's great. So the attendee might well want to get in touch directly with you, Geoff, to discuss this further. And very conveniently, the email address is still there. It's geoff@vikingpack.co.uk. Can these regulations be recommended to Latin American countries?
Well, the regulations around the transport of dangerous goods by air would be common, wouldn't they, Geoff?
Absolutely. I showed you the publication, the technical instructions, and I guaranteed that if you go to any South American country, you'll see that the legislation will require compliance with those instructions, because just about every country in the world is a signatory to what we call the Chicago Convention. And as a signatory, you are bound to adopt the standards and recommended practices of ICAO, one of which would be to implement the technical instructions into your legislation. So as far as the transport of dangerous goods per se will be, I have no doubt they will be in place in South America. Can't necessarily speak for how that applies to carriage by drone at the moment. As I say, it's in its infancy. So whilst we've got some, we're fairly clear in the requirements in Europe, what they are outside of Europe, then I couldn't say. I don't know if Anthony wants to comment any further on that.
Yeah, as far as the regulations are concerned, so a lot of us will be familiar with the EU 947 regulation that was mirrored at the point of Brexit, and that carried across the the references to use of a crash protected container if you're operating in a specific category. What individual countries or states have for their requirements for carriage by drone is on a state-by-state basis.
That leads nicely actually into the next question, which is, are the drone regulations for the carriage of dangerous goods limited to certain classes only?
Well, as we've said so far, we've only been involved in 3373, but there are, going forward, you almost need a crystal ball, but you can see that there would be a need potentially to move all kinds of dangerous goods if there's a need to move things very quickly to remote locations, for example. Then I can see that that need will have to be addressed going forward. But as I say, at the moment, we're concentrating more on the medical industry.
But and the regulations themselves don't, in terms of carriage by drone, it doesn't specify which classes of dangerous goods you can carry. It's about ensuring that in the event of a crash, that it's not posing a high risk to people on the ground in case it leaks. So different, that's what I was alluding to, with different crash protected containers are appropriate for different kinds of or classes of dangerous good. So there's nothing in the regulations that would stop you transporting something that's radioactive, for example, as long as it's in an appropriate container.
Is there a maximum altitude AGL to carry dangerous goods?
No. So the only thing where altitude would really come into it is to do with the crash protected container side of things again. And it depends on the certification of them as to what's appropriate for an altitude. But basically, as far as our testing went, well, we dropped it from 400 feet, and that was an altitude that was sufficient for the container to reach its terminal velocity. So it wouldn't matter if you were operating at 2,000 feet or 100 feet, essentially. So no, there's no altitude limit.
With the obvious exception of how high things can be carried at the moment by drone, and that will depend on your authorizations, obviously, at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the operational authorization will be the limit there, but the dangerous, for carrying dangerous goods, there's no specific limit associated with that.
Right. What is the range of available sizes and masses of your certified containers? So
the current container we have carries 156 mil vials, and each container at the moment needs to be certified separately. So when you change the container, it has to go through the certification process again. And so we then come up with a bespoke design, test it, get it approved by the VCA, and then it's ready to go. That's the process.
That's very good to know. Are there additional considerations when looking at crop spraying, fertilizers, pesticides from a regulatory aspect? I'm going to add in there that we held a webinar last week on unmanned aerial precision spraying, which possibly may be it will tie in with this, but that will be worth watching that one again, and that is available on the website at the moment on the ARPAS.UK website. But I'm also going to open it up to Geoff and Anthony too.
It's interesting because the technical instructions actually has an exception for aerial application as far as conventional aircraft are concerned, but I've never, this is something completely new to me. I don't know if Anthony's been involved in anything along those lines, but say from a conventional aviation application, there is an exception in the technical instructions. I didn't even know that drones are being used for that. It's you learn something new every day.
There you go. Well, in which case, Geoff, I recommend the webinar from last week to you too. Anthony, do you want to add to that at all?
No, I haven't got anything to add. So it sounds like there's possibly an exception there for the carriage of that kind of dangerous good. Yeah.
There is, and they link in with other regulators, etc., along the way as well. It's an interesting watch. It's a good one. Have you done any work with medicine regulators, e.g. the UK's MHRA, on how to transport medicines or blood products / samples classed as dangerous goods by drone, and also in compliance with medical distribution regulations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So you've got things like, what's the effective vibration on the efficacy of a medicine or something like that. We've really focused on the crash protected side of things and the UN packing instructions area, yeah, we work with our customers to sort out the other sort of medical requirements side of things.
Okay, that's great. Is the certification process governed by the UK CAA or the UN, i.e. 3373? That may mean more to you than to me.
So UN 3373 is simply the identification of the type of dangerous goods. So 3373 is a biological substance category B, so the low hazard infectious substance. The certification of the packaging, that is a process that we've gone through in the UK, where the UK Civil Aviation Authority are advised by the Vehicle Certification Agency. It's the VCA that recommends to the UK CAA, as they did in our case with our packaging. Once we submitted our reports to them, they are then recommended to the UK CAA for the granting of the approval.
That's a very handy process to know about. Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions? I have to say, those have been extremely detailed ones, which is great. And that's exactly why we're here, to find out more from those who really do know about it. In the meantime, I found that absolutely fascinating, really useful to have such a good insight from the dangerous goods application side of it. Obviously, there is a lot of work happening on drone delivery and drone logistics. So to know that the process around how to go about getting the approvals and the relevant training and what needs to be looked at is extremely useful. Thank you. Do we have any further questions? If we don't, I will suggest then that any further questions can be directly sent to Anthony, which is Venetz, VENETZ, at vikingpack.co.uk, and Geoff Leach, Geoff, at vikingpack.co.uk. We will send this recording out as a watch again link again in due course, and please do feel free to contact Geoff and Anthony directly to answer any further questions. Thank you very much indeed. If you have any further questions about what we do here at ARPAS-UK and how we can help you too, please do get in touch as well. Thank you, Geoff and Anthony, on behalf of everyone. I think that's been a fascinating look into drone logistics, transporting dangerous goods by drone. Thank you very much indeed. I am going to stop the recording.
Thanks for having us on today.
Yeah, thanks.